one of the biggest changes to come to superyachts, and for that matter, all maritime vessels, is now here. And we've talked about it in the past in previous iterations and states of readiness, but it's now here, fully operational, and it's a game changer. So what am I talking about? Of course, I'm talking about Starlink satellite internet. Now, if we go back just 18 months, 2 years, and the technology on board a yacht was quite different in terms of internet. Now, on land, we've been used to streaming TV and YouTube and Netflix for years now, on our phones while we're traveling to work, on a bus or waiting at the airport, etc. But on a yacht, it was very different. Despite yachts having the very best AV equipment available, the one thing that was hard to overcome were the limitations of the speed of the internet. And when I say best equipment, I've done installations on yachts where the budget for the audio-visual AV equipment has been over $1 million. Now, I showed you a boat recently that had a $700,000 TV on the bow. The limitations of the connection on board, what do I mean by that? Obviously, we're talking about VSAT, satellite internet. This is what was all yachts used before Starlink came along. So this meant that streaming of something over the internet was reserved for one or two people, you know, the owner and the guest maybe. Anyone else tried to do it at the same time, then they were going to struggle and start getting a lot of buffering. Limits on the bandwidth for crew and web filters to block streaming sites like Netflix and YouTube, etc. would be applied to prevent the owner being upset not being able to use the internet. So there were very often occasions when the owner is on board a yacht that the internet would be switched off completely for the crew. Now, this was despite the massive cost of installing VSAT satellite antennas on board a yacht. A pair of VSAT domes coming anywhere up to $500,000. And the monthly cost of the VSAT service from your internet provider was thousands of dollars a month also. So if we couldn't stream on board a yacht before Starlink, what did we do? Well, the AV systems consisted of devices to store databases of movies, such as the Kaleidoscope system. This was a very popular system on board superyachts. It still is on board superyachts, but they had a monopoly for a long time. And this system would import a DVD. You remember those DVDs? They would import the entire content of a DVD, menus and all, onto a hard drive, so you could access them in any cabin or place that has a TV. So if you're out on the bow section, you could connect and you could watch a movie that you've just purchased. You know, you've just downloaded it into this system and now you're watching it anywhere on board without the DVD needing to be present. And this technology had, like I said, a monopoly for years on board. It was extremely expensive. However, that company, Kaleidoscope, was sued by multiple movie companies, saying that the fact that they were effectively ripping or downloading the contents of the DVD and the disc was no longer needed was basically pirating. So they had to change their system and add these vaults to hold the DVDs in them so the playback could be possible legally from a legal perspective. The equipment was massively expensive. Vaults cost thousands of dollars, and one vault could only hold about 300 DVDs. So some vessels I worked on had 2 or 3 of these vaults installed into these massive server racks. Now, another popular choice was, and still is, Plex, which is effectively the same kind of system. The videos are ripped onto a hard drive and then you can be played from all around the yacht. Now, the reason why they were using these is because you couldn't stream anything over the internet. So we had to have everything installed locally on servers on board. Now, the highest bandwidth speeds available when I started in the industry was probably 1 megabits per second. That was in the cruise ship industry. By the time I got to the yachts, it was probably 10 megabits per second, which was massively expensive, but it had a very high latency. This was the biggest issue with VSAT. A simple explanation for this is the time a request takes to get from your device to the source and back again. So as an example, if you typed into Google search a question and then you hit send, the latency is the time it takes to go from your device up to the satellite, down onto the internet to Google, find the answer, and then go back along that same route back to your device. Now, the average latency on a VSAT satellite connection is about 600 milliseconds. So that's just over half a second, which when you think about it, it actually sounds quite fast, right? However, if you compare that latency to a land connection, which is around 30 milliseconds compared to 600 milliseconds, then you start to see the difference in speed. Now, because of the poor latency, even if you had a 20 megabits per second connection, it still felt slow compared to a land-based system because of that latency. And why was it like this? It's because of the distance the satellite is from the Earth. A VSAT satellite sits in a geostationary orbit about 36,000 kilometers from the Earth, so it takes some time to get up there and back down to the planet. Now enter Starlink. The revolutionary system means that geostationary satellites sitting up there at 36,000 kilometers are becoming a thing of the past. Elon Musk's satellites are a mere 400 kilometers compared to 36,000 kilometers above the planet, which means the time it takes to send data, or latency, is much lower. So how does it get around this? Well, the VSAT might have one satellite covering an entire ocean area. Starlink has hundreds or even thousands of satellites all talking to each other, covering that same area. One of the drawbacks of the VSAT system was the limitations on certain areas around the world because of the position of the satellites so far away in space, and also the limited bandwidth. They would concentrate beams to the most populated areas, so say the Caribbean or the Mediterranean, where most yachts congregate. So if you were in an area that wasn't normally populated by a large amount of vessels, such as during a crossing of an ocean like the Atlantic or the Pacific, then your bandwidth would be massively reduced simply because they couldn't supply what you were paying for in that area. So if you were on a yacht that had a 20 megabit per second connection, during the Atlantic crossing, you'd only be getting about 1 megabits per second for as long as a week. So on the crossing, the internet was severely compromised, and it would be for office use only, and the crew would barely get WhatsApp messages. And obviously on a crossing, the owner will not be on board, so it would just be crew. Now, by the way, that 20 megabits per second connection that you were getting on VSAT was $15,000 to $20,000 a month. A Starlink system doesn't have this issue, and it's because of the way the system works. With all these satellites, thousands of satellites in an orbit around the planet, they're effectively moving around in formation, covering the entire planet, so wherever you go, you get the same service. Now, a former colleague of mine who is on an Atlantic crossing right now as we speak has Starlink installed on the yacht that he works on, and he sent me some speed test results from the last few days of the trip. So the best result, as you can see here, is 160 megabits per second, and even the worst result is still 60 megabits per second, much faster than VSAT on her best day. We'll go into cost in a minute. Now you can see the latency is also much lower than VSAT. In these speed test results, they are between 159 and 70 milliseconds, which is almost as good as a land-based system. Now Starlink is not done as well. They're still aiming to get that the ping time down to under 40 milliseconds, which is similar to a land-based connection. And these results are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So let's compare to my service currently where I am, which is the land-based fiber optic cable internet connection. And you can see I've got 104 megabits per second, which is, I pay for 100 megabits per second, and I have a ping of 26 milliseconds. Now comparing the two here, comparing my connection to the Starlink connection, there's not that much difference there, which is mind-blowing, as I did an Atlantic crossing in 2020, and our speed was 1 megabits per second, as I explained earlier. Now, I had a chat with him about what it's like having Starlink on the crossing, and he said being able to stream movies mid-ocean without buffering is a game changer. There's that phrase again, game changer. And he said, and I said, with regard to the VSAT system, are they still using it? He said, well, yes, but we've got a minimal speed, so we can make a VoIP call. And the idea is to then increase the speed during a bus trip as a backup to the Starlink, just in case they have a failure. You always have redundancy. Now, of course, you can make VoIP calls on Starlink. The VoIP call he's referring to there is connected to the PBX system on board the yacht, and that is a number that was given to them by the service provider which they will have been using for years and they don't want to lose that number. So they've just got enough speed so they can use that to make calls. So VSAT is on its way out. People will use it as a backup for now. I highly doubt that new yachts being built will continue to install those VSAT antennas. Massively expensive and just not worth the money now that Starlink is the new king. Now, Starlink is still new and they're still launching more satellites. They aim to have, they've got about 6,000 satellites right now, but they're aiming the full system will have over 40,000 satellites. So the speeds will increase as they get more and more satellites. Now, the cost of Starlink on a yacht, the last time I checked, it's about $5,000 to buy 2 antennas, which is the marine version of Starlink, and then it's $5,000 a month. Now, it's much more than a home system. I know if you've got one out there or if you've got an RV system, much more expensive, but you can't use the RV system out in the ocean. And it's still a fraction of the cost of the VSAT system. Like I said, your minimum outlay for 2 VSAT antennas is probably $80,000. It can go up to $500,000. And then you've got that $15,000 to $20,000 a month fee for the connection. So the costs are massively different. Also, when you compare the 2 systems, it's completely different, isn't it? It's a bit like saying I used to pay $15,000 a month for my Fiat 500, and now I pay $5,000 a month for my Ferrari. And one of the things that always comes up when we talk about internet on a yacht or TVs on a yacht is the comment, I would never watch TV on a yacht. Why would you want to do that when you have the ocean and you have the weather and you have all the things that you could be doing? I get that. If I owned a super yacht, the last thing I'd be thinking about doing is watching TV. But you're thinking about it from a point of view of never actually being on a yacht for any length of time. Now, if you've ever been on a cruise, you probably didn't watch TV, right? Because there was so much to do, there was so much to investigate. But now imagine that cruise that you did, maybe it was a week or 2 weeks. Now imagine you're on board that cruise for 6 months, right? Now there comes a time when you just want to kick back and watch a movie or perhaps, a live sporting event or something like that, and you're going to watch it on TV. And also, whenever I show video footage of a super yacht, it's always really sunny weather, but the reality is it's not always sunny. And there are plenty of times when you're on board a yacht where the weather looks like this. I'll just sum it up by saying that if you own a TV now, then you'll want one on your yacht. And another comment that frequently comes up when we do videos about the internet is kind of the same really. Why would you be on the internet if you're on a yacht? I'd rather be scuba diving and swimming and laying out in the sun. Well, again, I understand it, and the yacht owners do all of those things, but when they're done in the evening and they sit down, they want to connect to the internet. And our lives are entwined now with being connected, and that doesn't change when you're at sea. And many of these owners, of course, are very successful businessmen and women, and they want to be connected to their systems and look at their stock prices and all that kind of stuff. So they need internet for that. And not only that, it's a requirement now. You can't be out there at sea without an internet connection. When you're talking about commercial vessels, certainly, you have to send customs data to ports. You have to send in a lot of paperwork for docking in various different countries. They download map updates for the digital ECDIS navigation systems on the bridge. They download weather updates and maps from weather data providers, and the crew keep informed with what's going on board with WhatsApp groups. So, it is a necessity now. So the internet revolution is well and truly here. Life at sea will never be the same.